You're listening to Mervin Hanley at THG, and let me say a special good night to you. Tonight we have a special guest from Anguilla, the Honorable Cora Richardson Hodge. Mrs. Hodge is the leader of the Anguilla United Front, and that's the party, and the leader of the opposition in the Anguilla House of Assembly. Mrs. Hodge, let me welcome you, Cora, to this program. I am happy to have you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanley. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And a special hello to all of your listeners, whether you are in Anguilla, in St. Kitts Nevis, or in the diaspora.
Okay. Now, I know if someone had asked me a few years back if Cora Hodge would be leader of a main political party and into the politics right now and in House of Assembly, I would have said no. And the reason for that is not that you're not capable, but I have observed you from a distance, and you are humble, conservative, no drama, Cora. And mind you, I'm not saying that you're not humble and conservative and all that, no. But it's just that what a great lady would get caught up in politics. I mean, politics, they say it's a dirty game, it's a shrewd game, so why would no drama Cora want to be a part of that? So I'll allow you the opportunity to give your fellow Anguillians and those across the region and in the diaspora a peek into the life of Cora, and you can probably tell us about yourself and why politics.
Yes, thank you very much, Marvin. It's an interesting description of me that you've given. And I can tell you that I've been elected since 2015.
Mm-hmm.
I first entered the political arena in 2010. And when I entered the political arena in 2010, it was really with the idea of wanting to make a contribution to Anguilla.
Mm-hmm.
So I can tell you that I honestly did not think that I would be where I am now, which would be the leader of the opposition and the leader of the Anguilla United Front. At the time that I entered the political arena, my vision was to simply be a part of a government, of an organization that would be able to take Anguilla further. I felt that there was a need for us to take things in a different direction, to do things differently, and to really advance our people when it came to our economic status.
Yes.
It came to education. It came to progression of the nation. And so I always felt that if you were going to complain or if you're not happy with an existing situation, then get involved and change it. And if you're not going to get involved, then sit down and shut up. And so for me, it came to that point where the opportunity arose in my constituency because the former Chief Minister, the Honorable Austin Fleming, who would have been Chief Minister from 2000 to 2010, would have stepped down, and he had indicated he wasn't going to run again, and they were looking for a candidate in my constituency. And so when I was approached, of course, I had to, the first thing I did was I got on my knees and I prayed to God for guidance. I spoke to my husband, I spoke to my family, and I received the support to enter into the political arena, because it's very important, Marvin, as you mentioned, the arena of politics it really takes a lot.
Yes.
It takes a lot in order to not only enter, but to stay the course. And to remain committed to the cause for which you first entered. And so without that family support, it's very difficult to be able to move forward. And so I had to ensure that I had my family's backing, my husband's backing before I entered into that arena. And so I did. I ran in 2010. I lost by 42 votes. And I'm sure that we can probably explore some of the factors at some point in time. In 2015, I became even more committed to playing my part in the development of Anguilla. And I ran again and was successful. I won by about 162 votes.
Wow.
And I won again. I contested again in 2020. And so today, I am the leader of the opposition in the Anguilla House of Assembly. In 2015, when I took office, I was appointed the Minister of Education, Labor, Environment, Constitutional Reform, as the Minister of Home Affairs in actual fact.
Yes.
And it included human rights, constitutional reform, I started with environment, and then education was transferred over to me, and so I became the Minister of Education in about March of 2017. So that's just a quick snapshot of my history, how I became entwined in the political arena. There you go.
What a journey. Now, I have to ask though, as you were speaking, I just came to mind, after such a landslide victory in 2015, what happened in 2020 though? How was it possible for the tide to turn against the Anguilla United Front led government like that?
Yes, so it's an excellent question, and one for the history books, I believe. I think that there are a number of factors that came into play. One of the things I think which was a major factor, I believe, would have been the elections in June of 2020 while the borders were closed. And we went to elections in the heart of COVID. And just prior to that, we would have had a series of difficult situations that we would have had to maneuver. So when we first entered in 2015, the first thing that we met would have been the banking situation. Now,
yes,
many persons would know that the ECCB would have taken over the National Bank of Anguilla and the Caribbean Commercial Bank in 2013 under the AUM administration through the then Chief Minister, the Honorable Hubert Jules, God rest his soul. And the ECCB had continued to have that conservatorship in place when we went through the elections in 2015. And so the first thing that we met when we got in was the banking situation that had to be resolved. And today we have the National Commercial Bank of Anguilla, which is a combination of the NBA and the CCB. And we were able to secure the many deposits of our Anguillians and residents in Anguilla. And that would have come as a result of a banking resolution. Now, the banking resolution may not have been the ideal resolution in terms of ensuring that everyone, all monies were being secured, because there was the offshore sector that could not be secured. But the resolution came at a cost. And the cost to that would have been a cost that would have to have been borne by Anguilla. So it had to be something where the people could be able to bear it. But at the same time, you had to ensure that you secured the monies in the accounts of the elderly, the young persons, every person who would have had savings in Anguilla. Their savings would have been secured through the banking resolution. That was critical. And for those persons who were over the amount of, I can't recall the amount, but whatever the amount was at that time, the monies had to go into a DPT, a Deposit Protection Trust, so that the monies would be given over time. And so imagine, Mervin, entering into a situation where you have a banking situation to address. Unbeknownst to you as a government, you're faced with a situation of having to resolve it. It comes at a cost because you could not conduct the banking resolution for free, but you had to make the difficult step to be able to not only save at least one of the banks, but also to save the depositors' accounts. And so it was a very difficult period. So I would say that would have been one major issue that we had to address. Then after we addressed the banking situation, that was in 2016, we had Hurricane Irma in 2017. And Hurricane Irma, as you probably would know, totally devastated Anguilla. And we were successful, and I say we, under the leadership of the then Minister of Finance and leader of the country, the Honorable Victor Franklin Banks, we were able to secure a £60 million grant from the UK government in order to rebuild our infrastructure. And that grant allowed us to reconstruct our educational facilities, because all of our schools had been impacted. One of our primary schools was totally destroyed, and our Albino Lake Comprehensive School Campus A had to be rebuilt. There was so much damage to the buildings that we simply could not put our children in those premises.
Mm-hmm.
And so in addition to the educational structures, we also had a significant investment in health. And so the focus of the Anguilla United Front during that period of time in terms of rebuilding Anguilla focused on the people itself. So you had the banking situation, which secured depositors' accounts in 2016. 2017, the primary focus was health and education of our people, making sure that we we established infrastructure that was not only resilient, but would take us into the future. And so today, when you drive around Anguilla, you will see that there are a number of the schools have either new buildings or completely rebuilt. The Albino Lake Campus A is one of the largest projects in Anguilla, in that it is being rebuilt to house our students from third form to fifth form. And we also would have all of the health facilities, the clinics that we have across the island. Those were rebuilt as well. The hospital was rebuilt. And so there's a lot of work that would have been commenced in terms of construction. So that was 2017. And then 2020, in March of 2020, Anguilla will close its borders. And we made the difficult decision because in January and February, those figures in terms of tourist arrivals reflected some of the largest on record. And what it said was that the country was coming back, mm-hmm. and that our tourists, whether they were returning visitors or persons coming to the island for the first time, wanted to come to Anguilla and to be in Anguilla. And so when we closed the borders in March of 2020, the decision again was to protect the health and safety of our Anguillan people. And so when we closed the borders, naturally the hotels would not have been able to accept guests. And so people had to be laid off. People were home not working. But I can tell you that the general feedback, if you can recall when COVID first arrived, not just in Anguilla but throughout the world, the devastating impact that it was causing to people. And Anguilla not having the type of health infrastructure necessary, and us being very concerned in terms of being overrun with with COVID at that time, I think people were very happy. Yes, they were home, but they were healthy. We closed the borders in March of 2020. For 3 weeks, we stayed home, and we wanted to ensure to see whether or not we had any incidents of COVID. We had 3 just as we closed the border. And we wanted to see whether or not it had actually spread through the communities. So we had lockdown for about 3 weeks. After the 3 weeks, we tentatively reopened. And it is that decision to close and tentatively reopen that allowed Anguillians to continue to live, and residents of Anguilla to continue to live in Anguilla as if COVID did not exist. The way in which people had to live in other parts of the world in terms of being on lockdown, being sick, the extent of hospitalizations and deaths that were occurring was not taking place in Anguilla. And so we made, again, the difficult decision. Now, the follow to that is that people were unemployed. And so when we went to elections in June of 2020, there were a number of factors that came into play. And one of the factors as well, a big factor that I think we need to discuss, is the goods and services tax. Yes. I think the goods and services tax became the key platform issue for this administration, the Anguilla Progressive Movement, that allowed them to be able to get into government. And if you want me to talk about it, I can talk about it. Sure.
And I am going to get to that, but back to COVID, and I need to ask you something about the Albino Lake Comprehensive School, because you mentioned it. Yes. With COVID, and I empathize with governments then, the governments who were in office during that time, and with your government then, because there was absolutely no handbook, no playbook, no handbook for COVID. It was something new that everybody was experiencing for the first time. We were all experiencing it for the first time. Governments had no clue. Yes, they copy from each other. And so at one point in time, it was a state of confusion because it was really a difficult time and governments had to make difficult decisions. At the same time, you had frustrated citizens. They don't want to hear, oh, we're going to be on lockdown. They don't want to hear, COVID will cause us to lose our jobs. They just want to work. They just want to be out there and be free and doing what they have to do. And I think that when we look back, we'll recognize that a number of governments were booted out of office, well, a few of them, because around that same COVID situation, the electorate did not forgive them.
Well, I think in our case, with the exception of the goods and services tax, I believe that the people of Anguilla generally felt that we had done a good enough job to be re-elected. I think as I mentioned, the goods and services tax, the GST, became a political football and a key prong of the APM's campaign. And people who were hurting, being given the promise that there will be no GST implemented if the APM was elected. And remember, in the context of not being employed, being home, sitting down, not having income, with the idea that at some point in time over the next couple of years, because the goods and services tax under the Anguilla United Front was not intended to be implemented in one go. It was to be implemented in stages. The United Kingdom government had agreed that we would implement it in that way in order to ensure that such a tax that would be so widespread would be put in a way in which we would be able to assess the first aspect, determine whether or not it was working for the people of Anguilla or whether it was not, make adjustments, deal with that aspect before you move on to implementing the next aspect. And remember, this was in the context of coming out of Hurricane Irma, still suffer from the effects of the economic downturn. And so as a result of that, that proposal that was given by the then former Minister of Finance, Honorable Victor Banks, was accepted by the UK government.
And I was going to come to that, because the current government now, they're going through with it, but their argument is that this was placed before the people under the administration you served between 2015 and 2020. So yes. My question, were you for the GST before you were against it?
Well, let me tell you, I was never against the GST.
Okay.
What I'm talking about, I'm against the GST in the form in which it was implemented.
Okay.
And let me explain what I mean by that.
Sure.
And we talk about, a lot of times we hear this current administration spend most of their time, although they've been elected for 3 years, campaigning about what they met and how they met it in the former administration. But I think what is significant that people may be overlooking is that in 2011, under an Anguilla United Movement administration, which was the predecessor to the APM, the then leader of government business, Honorable Hubert Hughes, he and his party in Executive Council would have agreed to move forward with the implementation of a GST or VAT structure with the idea of it being implemented by December of 2014. So I say that to say that the GST, whether it was a GST VAT structure, whatever it is, a wholesale tax reform was coming. And it was put on the table in 2007, 2008, after we started to suffer from the worldwide economic downturn. And many people remember that Anguilla fell off the cliff during that period of time. And so the UK government would have said, how are you going to fund your country moving forward? There has to be tax reform. And so every administration since has been progressing some form of GST or VAT structure. So I just put that in context. So as to say that when we entered in 2015, there was a foundation, there was already undertakings that had been given, for the implementation of GST by December of 2014.
Mm-hmm.
There were consultants that had been in, that were looking at the framework, etc. So in 2015, when we took office, the GST could not be progressed at that point in time because we had to deal with the banking situation first. So you couldn't deal with that and GST at the same time. It would have been too onerous on the people. So the primary focus was the resolution of the banks.
Okay.
2017, Hurricane Irma. GST could not have been an option at that point in time. And in 2019, we implemented the interim goods tax, which was the first phase of the GST structure, which meant that you took all of your existing taxes and you reconfigured them, but at the end of the day, the amount being paid out or paid into the treasury would have been revenue neutral for the people of Anguilla. So you took the existing taxes, you reconfigured them, and the same amount of money theoretically should have been the amount of money that the government was obtaining. So it would not have, the intent was not to increase or impose any tax at that point in time, any new tax. That was the foundation. The other two aspects with the GST would be the increase from the 9% interim goods tax to a 13%. And that is where we depart in terms of how this was to be done. When we first went through the interim goods tax, the discussions with the people of Anguilla was that it would be done, the next stage to come, the GST would have been done not at the port, but at point of sale. We had received advice from the business people in Anguilla that to impose GST at the port would have been to remove the cash available for businesses and put it in the hands of government. What do we have today? The very same structure. So we weren't. So when I say that we were looking at implementing GST in phases, but not in the same form, that is what I mean in part.
Okay.
The other thing I want to say before I move on, if you want to move on from this issue, because I could talk about this for quite a while.
I realize.
The GST was intended to, the GST at the time that it was implemented was done wholesale. So this administration took whatever structure that we had agreed with the United Kingdom to implement it in phases, and they made a decision to impose it at one time in 2021 while we were still suffering from the effects of COVID. And that is what created a major issue. The other thing as well is that this government has campaigned and is constantly saying that they met a GST there for them that they fixed. Well, the reality is that there was no documentation, there was no GST, Goods and Services Tax Act, that came to the previous administration for us to look at and make a determination on. We never took anything to consultation. We never saw a draft bill. There was never any discussion, never went to the Executive Council, never went to the House of Assembly. And so whatever draft bill that they would have picked up, there was no evidence that they can point to suggest that the goods and services tax that they implemented is something that we left there for them. But the larger point, in all of this is that this administration campaigned that they would not implement GST. So all of the issues that we're seeing today, the anger that the people are feeling, the expression of hurt and pain that's coming out, and what the people are suffering from, is because this government campaigned that they would not implement GST.
Right.
And so they demonized the concept of goods and services tax, no matter what form it was coming in. And they said that if you elect us, we will not impose it. And even after elections, the Premier would have said to the people of Anguilla that he had spoken with the foreign minister, the overseas foreign minister, and she had said to him that as long as they came with an effective alternative, there would be no need to implement the goods and services tax. So what this government is suffering from today is they're having demonized the goods and services tax for the purposes of campaigning, and then had to turn around and had no plan to implement anything else. And so that is why we have the GST in the form that we have today.
Honorable Leader, you mentioned earlier about the the grant that was given after Irma and Hurricane Irma. And of course, one of the institutions you mentioned was the Albino Lake Hodge Comprehensive School. Now, I believe, yes, of course, that started under the Anguilla United Front led government. But this APM administration has criticized the process and has laid blame at your feet for the delays. What say you?
I'm not sure. I can tell you, Mervin, that I've been out of office for 3 years. And it boggles the mind that you can have an administration in government for 3 years blaming a previous administration for delays, construction delays. That is absolutely amazing to me. But let me go further than that and say this. The idea of the Albino Lake Hodge Comprehensive School reform is not something that only started after Hurricane Irma. There is clear evidence, there's documentation, there were discussions, public consultations that were held in terms of reform because the buildings at the Campus A were old. They were 50 plus years. They were falling apart. They were, the walls were cracking. There were just a number of issues, and there was a need, a recognition that there was an urgent need to rebuild the Albino Lake Hodge Comprehensive School infrastructure. So let's start from there. When Hurricane Irma would have hit Anguilla, and with the failing infrastructure at the school, it is obvious that you could not put the children back in those conditions. And so we had to go onto a shift system. We had to demolish some of the buildings because we could not use them and put our children and teachers at risk. And the rest of the buildings we were able to patch up and utilize. But we were on shift system. We reopened school in about October of 2017. And we were on shift system from then until I believe school is about to open. It's been delayed, and that is because this minister, they're trying to finish the works in terms of building a school. Now, every project, infrastructural project that has been undertaken in Anguilla, whether it's health, the education, any project whatsoever, would have gone through the program, Anguilla Program Committee.
Yes.
So the plans, the business case has to be prepared first. The business case will explain why you need the funds, what is the purpose, how much do you anticipate having to spend on this project, and why is it necessary, and what are the alternatives. That business case was submitted for Anguilla. And when Boris Johnson, before he was Prime Minister, visited Anguilla, Priti Patel came to Anguilla, and the former Overseas Minister, Lord Ahmad, came to Anguilla. Each of them, a tour of the school was given with each of them. And each of them understood the dire need to rebuild our school, which is a comprehensive school and the main high school in Anguilla. We have a private school that goes into first and second form, but and there's online schooling, and there may be smaller private schools. But Albino Lake Hodge Comprehensive School is the only comprehensive school, the only public school in Anguilla that houses all of our children. So from the primary schools, they are feeders into this one high school. And when you're faced with a situation like that, you understand that there is a time where you have to invest in the education of our children for the future. You cannot continue to put them in the circumstances that they were in before. Anguilla and our young people have advanced beyond that. And so what we needed to do was to ensure that we rebuild a school that was fit for purpose, that would house and educate our children for not just today, tomorrow, but 20, 30, 40 years, 50 years into the future. And that was the vision. And that vision was something that had already been identified before Irma. So when Irma came and destroyed the buildings, it was the opportunity was given to education to be able to put forward the vision that they had to improve the educational system and the quality of education in our country. And we did that. I think that you can probably tell by my passionate explanation or my passionate expression that I was the Minister of Education at the time. And so we would have pushed that. And we were successful with the proposal that was given. And the British government would have released the funding for us to be able to do so. Construction started in about 2019. It was delayed. Of course, it was a major project. We had engaged the services of a consultant or a project manager. They also designed the school actually from out of Barbados, Design Collaborative. And so they would have taken the lead in terms of the rebuilding, the building of the new site, on a new site. Now, it's important for me to say, Mervin, that despite all of the criticisms and arguments and issues that you hear, we took that building and that design to public consultation. And we had a number of consultations where we invited the general public. We invited, whether you were elected or not elected, we invited students, we invited teachers. We had separate meetings with teachers for them to, the heads of departments, for them to identify the needs that they had, what was currently not being met in our curriculum, what was currently not being met as a result of shortcomings of classrooms, etc., what was needed in the classrooms, so that we could put together a fit-for-purpose building. And that's what we did. So when we went to consultation, I can tell you that not one single member of this administration ever presented themselves to a consultation, ever weighed in on the design of the buildings, the location of the school, etc. And so it is laughable that after being elected, they could criticize. Well, there's one thing that I would have heard, and I think you may have recalled, where the Honorable Hayden Hughes, who is the current Minister of Infrastructure, would have made a comment on your show, I believe. And he would have said that he was asked by the former Governor Tim Foy whether or not, what he would have done had he received the £60 million. And he said he would put it into the development of the airport. So what does that mean? It means that education would not have received the funding that it has received. It means that the focus would not have been on rebuilding health and education for the benefit of all people of Anguilla. And his idea was that you put it into the airport, you bring more people to Anguilla, and from those higher numbers, then you can build a high school, then you can build the health facilities. I'm not sure, I don't know about you, Mervin, but I think that is a complete pie-in-the-sky idea. So while you're waiting for while our children are waiting to go into, to come out the shift system, to go into a proper school, etc., you're putting the money into the airport. That's amazing to me. So when I say that to say that it is clear where the focus of this administration has been. It hasn't been on education. It has been on roads. It has been on the airport. It has been on the Blowing Point Ferry Terminal. And by the way, all of those projects bragged about by the Minister of Infrastructure are projects that were in existence and were contemplated prior to his taking office. The Blowing Point Ferry Terminal was certainly one of the projects from the 60 million pound funds, and the issue at that time was agreeing to the size of the building and what would be contained in the building. And that was done after he took office.
And to his credit, well, he mentioned on the interview, that's Hayden Hughes, Honorable Hayden Hughes, he said he believed in continuity. So projects that he met there, he would have decided, or his government would have decided to move forward with it. Well, the same wasn't for the GST and all of that, but yes.
And the same apparently was not for the high school, since they're making so many complaints. Now, what's interesting about the high school, and I'll make this one more point, is that in the House of Assembly, the leader of government business, irrespective as to what they say on the street and the rhetoric that they're given to criticize what I think is a beautiful school. It's going to cost a lot to maintain, but I think that it's an investment we need to make if you are serious about developing your people for the future. We need to be able to do it if you're talking about investing in our young people. But one of the comments that the Premier would have made in the House of Assembly was that there were sufficient funds to finish the high school, and that he blamed the project managers. He blamed the consultant that out of Barbados who was hired to be able to do the job. So that in itself is instructive. And of course, 3 years later, I can't tell you what has happened during that time. So, there you go.
Right. And we are up against the break. But before that, the government, in particular, the Honorable Kenneth Hodge, they have been taking a victory lap as it relates to the minimum wage. They have stated along with Minister Hayden Hughes, they have said you failed Anguillians when we speak of the minimum wage. Do you agree with that statement, that you failed Anguillians over the minimum wage argument?
Again, this government focuses more on campaigning than they do on actually running the country, which is why we are where we are. The minimum wage is based on the Labor Relations Act 2019, which was implemented under my administration, under my term as Minister of Labor in government. Mm-hmm. And so the Fair Labor Relations Act would have been, the Fair Labor Standards Act, would have been a 1974 outdated act that had been on the books for a long time. There was an urgent need to revisit our labor laws. They had not been done in many, many years. And so when I took office, I had a determination to ensure that we reform labor. Plus, there were a number of issues that were taking place in our labor market, in our employment market, which had not existed before. And so it was clear that the nature of labor relations had changed in Anguilla, and so there was a need for urgent reform. And that work started on my entry into office in 2015. And in 2019, we were successful in implementing the Labor Relations Act. Now, the Labor Relations Act did a number of things. It increased the holiday period from 12 days to 15 days. It allowed for redundancy packages, which did not exist in Anguilla. And I know in St. Kitts Nevis, redundancy has been part of your laws for many, many years.
Yes.
Where if you are made redundant, you are given a take-home package based on the length of years of service, etc. That did not exist in Anguilla. Under the Labor Relations Act 2019, that was implemented. And the other important thing that it did was it set out the ability for minimum wage to be implemented either island-wide or by sector. The Fair Labor Standards Act provided for it to be done sectorally. But as you may know, many countries have decided to pass a minimum wage across the board, one flat minimum wage to apply to all sectors. That was able to be implemented. We specified that it would be possible in our Fair Labor Standards Act. So our Labor Relations Act 2019. So when we hear about the bragging, etc., the foundation was laid. The next step, before I left office, we had gone through the process of identifying persons to sit on the minimum wage committee. We had identified the different organizations that would weigh in on this process. But we decided to place it on hold because it would have been less than a year before the general election. And we knew that process, if it was done right and it was done properly, would exceed the time needed before we got to the election. So we decided to place it on hold until the next administration, whoever they may be, can come in and continue the process. And that's all it is. Again, it's a continuation of the foundation that had been laid. And I have to say that is really the hallmark of this administration. I see them as a holding government. I see them as a caretaker government in that they've come in and continued the work, the foundations for which have already been laid, and are now taking credit for things that they did not implement, but for things that they are following through on. And that's the reality.
We're up against the break. We're speaking with the Honorable Cora Richardson Hodge of Anguilla. We'll be right back after this.
Arlinsons have been serving the people of St. Martin for over 40 years, and the food and service get better and better. From early morning, customers flock to the bakery for their favorite sandwiches, cakes, pastries, you name it. First thing at mornings and last thing at afternoons, folks rush to Arlinsons for simply the best. There are two locations, Colbay and on the Punfill. In Colbay, the opening hours are Monday to Friday from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. On Saturdays, 6 a.m. to 5 p.m. And on Sundays, 6:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. and 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Opening hours on the Punfill, Monday to Friday, 6:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. Saturday and Sunday, 6:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. We also cater for weddings, parties, special events, whatever the occasion. It's Carl & Sons. Our staff, we are always happy to serve you. Call us today, the Colby location, 721-544-2462. That's 721-544-2462. Or in Phillipsburg, 721-543-1059. That's 721-543-1059. It's Carl & Sons Bakery. We are here to serve you.
And we're back with the Honorable Cora Richardson Hodge, leader of the Anguilla United Front, leader of the Anguilla opposition leader there in the Anguilla House of Assembly. Now, we have seen the video of Minister Quincy Gunsmery 100 times or more. And tonight I absolutely have no appetite in replaying that. But we have heard the threatening words to a private citizen. Minister Hughes, Hayden Hughes, he was on my program and he said there was so much more that took place that we did not see. And I'm not sure how much more after seeing almost a 3-minute clip. But you have called for her resignation. You have called for the Premier to terminate her services. That did not happen. I believe you have asked the governor to intervene. Clearly that did not happen either. So what now?
Right. So let me just weigh in very quickly on that situation. It's a very unfortunate circumstance. It is something that has caused great embarrassment, not just to the government, but to the people of Anguilla as a whole. The fact that you can have a sitting minister of government display such words and conduct, and the fact that it is recorded, it is very difficult to see how you can walk away without some sort of recognition on the government's part that what was done was wrong, and more than just recognition, but action. Now, Mervin, as a legal mind and as an attorney for over 20-something years practicing, I am well aware that there are consequences to what amounts to criminal actions. Mm-hmm. Yes? And so our criminal code provides for penalties and recognizes crimes from simple assault, even use of threatening language, and it runs the gamut down to burglary and any sort of injury against another person, etc. Mm-hmm. So it is quite broad. And we all know that when we are in a situation such as that, it is difficult for the police to say that they will see a situation such as that having taken place and ignore it. It is difficult for the average person to behave in such manner and it be ignored. And so when that recording came out, one of the first things that my focus was on was not so much the criminality of the actions that took place either between the minister and the private individual, but the actions of the young lady as a minister of government. Mm-hmm. Now remember, we are leaders. As elected representatives, the people look up to us. We're elected to be in a position in government or in opposition where everyone cannot sit in a seat. So we're elected to sit in a seat to represent the people who elected us and to speak on behalf of the people. And our conduct has to be such that our people can look up to and can respect. When something like that takes place, we are all human, yes, but it cannot come without consequences. And so my expectation was that the young lady, either herself or through the Premier, would have been given time off, suspended from her ministerial duties, and not necessarily fired, terminated, but that some action be brought to show that this is wrong. It is more than just saying, I'm sorry, they lost my cool. It is a matter of showing that there are consequences for our actions when we fail to abide by the normal dictates and norms of our society that we're expected to in our positions of authority. it is important that our young people, our children, see that irrespective as to what cloak of authority we carry, that we are held to a higher standard, or at least to the same standard as to every other person in our community. So if there was a general, an average citizen in Anguilla that was at a restaurant, held up a chair, was engaged in a back and forth with someone in a public place that was recorded, I am pretty sure that the police would have gone and picked up that person. And in this particular case, the private citizen was actually picked up and arrested by police. He was released after, but he was picked up. And it was clear from the recording that went out that it was not him alone engaged in an altercation. The minister picked up a chair, she rounded the table, she passed the Minister of Education, Bianca Kentish Rogers, she passed the Minister of Infrastructure, the Honorable Hayden Hughes. Not one of them sought to stop her and take the chair from her as responsible ministers of government, as responsible citizens, and as colleagues. And I've heard the Minister Hayden Hughes say on your show that he considers himself to be the most senior member of all the ministers of government. But where was the seniority displayed when that young minister, Quincy Gomes-Marie, picked up the chair and walked around him? He remained on his phone. He did not engage. You didn't necessarily have to engage with the private citizen, but you should have engaged with your colleague and taken the chair from the colleague and tell her not to go down that road. But he did not. And so when you look at all of those actions, and remember, the recording that went out to the general public was taken by one of those ministers. It was not taken by an innocent bystander. It was not taken by someone standing on the street and just happened to capture it. One of those ministers who were there took the video of the action and the words and what was taking place at the time. So I would consider the video to have been self-inflicted wounds that this government would have caused to themselves. And when you suffer from self-inflicted wounds, you treat those wounds. You don't ignore them. And you have to have a greater understanding as to your responsibility to the people of the country. You have to be seen to recognize that the standard that you hold other people to, you should be held to the same standard, irrespective as to what your position is. So my view has always been that she should have been suspended. The period of time would have been up to them, whether it was with pay, without pay, but something from the government's end to show that there is a clear recognition of wrongdoing, that it would not be tolerated, and that these types of incidents are not encouraged by the Premier, by the governor, by anyone in Anguilla, and it should not be overlooked. I think it could have been dealt with a lot differently. I think that had it been a situation which I was involved, the day would not have ended with Quincy Gomes-Marie and the private citizen not having sat down, discussed the situation, dealt with it in a different manner, and a heartfelt apology, not an apology, a concocted apology where you come out and you say, yes, I lost my temper, I'm human, but look at what he did to me. And as a woman, I felt threatened, right? And so you're trying to play that innocent, hurt woman card, and the reason why it hasn't been accepted by the people of Anguilla is because there was a video recording which showed that she was aggressive. It doesn't matter whether it was at the beginning or at the end. It showed her role in the altercation, in which she actually picked up a chair, walked around two ministers of government, and approached and walked towards the private citizen.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so it's clearly a situation where something should have been, something formal and quick should have been done to address the situation. I have written to the governor because I wrote to the governor initially when the incident first occurred to express my concern that as a minister of government, there is a code of conduct that applies to every elected representative and every minister of government. And so that code of conduct governs how we should behave, and it speaks about propriety, conduct, behavior, the standards to which you should be upheld. And if there is an issue, report it to the governor. And so on Tuesday of this week, I would have penned a letter to our acting governor, Paul Candler, outlining the fact that while I had written before the response that was received from the governor at the time was that they would allow the criminal investigation to take its course, and there would be no further discussion at that time. So what have we found out now? We found out that the criminal proceedings were apparently instituted, but was dismissed before it even got to the footsteps of the courthouse, before a trial has even commenced by the Attorney General. And so that leaves now the question that has still been unaddressed. Do you recognize that the behavior of the minister was contrary to the very code of conduct that you ensure that all ministers are to ascribe to? And are there consequences for failure to abide by that code? It sets a precedent, not just for this administration, but for every administration moving forward. It also sets a precedent for our young people, the people in society who are looking and who are saying, well, look, how can you discipline me? How can you tell me that what I did was against the law? When you had a minister who was recorded and having acted contrary to our laws and contrary to the code, and there's a slap in the wrist and say, well, we are all human, and move forward.
Were you surprised?
As a country.
Were you surprised by the Attorney General's decision to remove this from criminal proceedings?
No, I was not. And I can tell you why, is that I believe, in my view, this Attorney General has gotten himself involved in the political arena as opposed to being on the sidelines. And so I have served while I was a minister of government, I think I would have interacted with at least 2 or 3, and even prior to being a minister of government and even after in opposition, I've dealt with a number of attorney generals, and my approach, how I've seen them approach their position is, yes, they are in a position where they are an advisor, they are advising the governor, they are advising the government. When they go to the House of Assembly, they promulgate laws that are seen to be general, not necessarily based on a ministry, but general applicable laws for the country. He's the one that gets up in the House of Assembly and presents them to the House. There is also the recognition that if the government is sued, it is in the person of the Attorney General and another minister of government or the AG, depending on the circumstances itself. So the Attorney General has a critical role to play in government, and he also plays an advisory role as an ex officio member in Executive Council. Mm-hmm. So, but there are times such as this, I believe, where the Attorney General would have crossed the border in terms of trying to maintain that separation and seeking to ensure that what he does can be supported by the law and maintained by the expected norms of the expected norms that exist in our society. And mm-hmm. when you look at, so let me say this: public interest is provided for in the Constitution for the Attorney General to get involved. There's also a code of conduct for prosecutors, right?
Yes.
That also provides for the public interest that you can dismiss a case, but there are certain factors that you have to look at. And in a situation like this, where it was such a high-profile matter, it was recorded, there seemed to be a desperate treatment in terms of the way in which the private citizen is being handled versus the way in which the minister was being handled, certainly at the very beginning of the matter, that when you say that you are discontinuing the matter on the basis of a public interest, in whose public interest? Mm-hmm. What is the public interest that you're seeking to achieve? Is it better for the people of Anguilla to see that you discontinued the matter against the minister and the private citizen? Is it because of political reasons that you don't want to have this government fall? And I don't think that they will. I think that, and like I said, there are ways in which this process could have gone through, where even if she was found guilty or it went through the trial, etc., anything could happen coming out of that. Mm-hmm. But to stop it at the very beginning gives the appearance of interference on some level such that while there's a recognition of criminal activity, it was the prosecution of that criminal activity was stopped. And the question that the people of Anguilla are asking is why, especially in light of the fact that both the Premier and the Governor of Anguilla, when the incident first happened, put it in the hands of the criminal proceedings and said we will await the outcome of the criminal investigation and we will not take any action at this point in time. And now we see today the criminal action has been discontinued.
While we are on the topic of criminal action, I want to get a response from you as we wind down this interview regarding comments from the Honorable Hayden Hughes as of late. We have mentioned the name Hayden Hughes a few in this interview. Sometimes I forget that he's not the Premier of Anguilla. However, he has been posting about criminal charges against you and all back in a couple of years ago. But we know that those were dismissed because there was no case and there were no grounds to begin with, as I did my own research. But this has been meted out to the Anguillian public now as it was a few years back. And so it has raised its ugly head. Does Hayden Hughes know something that we don't know? Because why would he be bringing this back to the general public? Or is it a matter of throwing food against the wall and hopefully something sticks? Or is it a distraction from what is actually happening at this current time?
Well, you raise an interesting question, Mervin, in terms of whether Hayden Hughes knows something that the general public doesn't know. I can say to you that between 2010 and 2015, when the Anguilla United government was elected, Mr. Hughes would have been the parliamentary secretary in charge of tourism. So he would have had a vested interest in that campaign in 2010. Mm-hmm. I first entered the political arena in April of 2009. And in January of 2010, just 3 days before nomination day, a search was conducted on my offices. And the way in which the search was conducted was very suspicious. It appears that the search warrant was, they went to the court. They could not get the grounds to be able to, they could not satisfy the grounds in order to have the search approved. And what they did instead was they went to a lay person who would have been a notary public, a justice of the peace, to be able to get the search warrant. So that was the first suggestion that there is something that was being done that ought not to have been done. The next thing is that what came out afterwards, and based on my investigations and findings, was that the search in my offices was as a result of a complaint that was made by one individual that another attorney and I had padded our invoices for the benefit of a client. Mm-hmm. Now, in the ordinary course, Mervin, that is something that would never make it into the criminal arena. How does that arrive on the basis of a search warrant? And these are all things that the orders were approved by the court, etc. So everything was in order, but there was an allegation that was raised in relation to padding of invoices for a client. The client didn't make a complaint. No other party made a complaint. It was a third party who may have had political leanings that would have made that report. So searches were conducted, and at the end of the day, while there was nothing that came out of the search, it was enough for it to be able to take the political platform.
Yes. And
for them to use it during the campaign in 2010. Now, what is so damaging and what is so, and when you mentioned the game of politics, the arena of politics, imagine an attorney with a clean record, never had any complaints or issues or anything reported to the bar, never had a client which would have come out to the public and said that she stole from them or anything, nothing untoward. All of a sudden have a stained reputation for political gain. And that is where I found myself. And so after the search was conducted, 3 days before nomination day, you have to consider the fact, why 3 days before nomination day? right?
Right.
And in my view, it was intended to prevent me. They thought they would find something. It was intended to prevent me from being able to run in the general election. So it's a whole, the history of this thing, and that was 13 years ago in 2010. The whole history of this thing is just, it smacks of a nasty level of politics that I do not engage in. I have never engaged in, and I will not ever engage, because when you are campaigning and you have an issue with a candidate, you base it based on their ability, on their skill, on what they bring to the table, not try to destroy their reputation and their character. And so after that search was conducted, I determined that two things. One, I was determined to sue the government for the manner in which they conducted the search, for the ulterior motive of which was trying to prevent me from running in the general elections, in my view. And the other would have been to double down, in my mind, on the need to represent Anguilla, because if this is the nature of people in the political arena, then we have to do what we need to do to ensure that these people are eradicated from the political arena, and that what remains are capable people who are qualified, who are able to move forward, and who can represent the people effectively, and not the nasty nature of politics that has been the hallmark of the political arena for many, many years. So I made a decision. People ask me, are you going to run again? I said, hell yes, what do I have to lose? I have nothing to lose at this point. And so in 2015, I was more committed than ever to representing the people of Anguilla to ensure that this sort of nasty nature of politics was eradicated. So yes, the Mr. Houston, you made mention, it's almost as if he's a premier, because he is the person who has been out on the different media speaking and spreading a lot of misrepresentations, and taking a half truth and adding non-truths to the rest of it, etc. He has been at the forefront in recent times. He's been on your show. He's been on another radio program yesterday, I believe, etc. And I think he's been on radio locally in Anguilla as well. So the point I'm making is that the charges were filed against me 6 months after I filed my case against the government of Anguilla, against the Attorney General, the Commissioner of Police, and the Inspector. When you file a charge 6 months after a lawsuit has been filed, and you go to the court and you say, well, look, we filed charges to stop this case. Again, another maneuver to try to stop my charging the government, and putting them to task for that illegal search in my offices. For 2 years, Mervin, I had to appear before the court, the magistrate's court, on trumped up charges. And after 2 years, the Attorney General, who would have taken office the year before, came to court and said that, having looked at the facts of this case, they were not convinced that it was a matter that should continue, and dismissed the charges. 2 years. And I patiently waited. I took no steps. I never engaged the prosecution. I never engaged any party with respect to discontinuing the matter, because I was convinced that they had no case, that there were no charges, and that it was trumped up, and eventually it would be found out. And it was. And then I sued the government again. And that time I sued was for malicious prosecution, for having filed charges against me when they knew that there was no case. And so that matter was settled. An apology was given in court by the Attorney General's chambers in terms of the criminal charges, etc., that have been levied against me in the entire matter. And my legal fees were paid. But for the purposes of political expediency, you can understand why a member of government, such as Mr. Hughes, would want to relive or ensure that this matters continue to live because it's for political expediency. They cannot talk about my service to the people of Anguilla while I was a minister of government. They cannot talk about all of the advancements that I made, constitutional reform, the amendments to the Labor Relations Act, everything geared towards enhancing the lives of the people of Anguilla. They cannot talk about all of the positive things that I have done in my constituency, but they can bring up time and time again these concocted charges that were used for their own political gain. And so with that, I would say it will. I'm sure that they will continue to use it. There was nothing behind the charges. I don't have to prove anything to anyone. The fact that I went through 2 years of dealing with a man, that's why I can say I speak from a matter of personal experience and personal knowledge.
Yes.
In this matter with Quincy Gums Marie, because I have been through the trenches myself. I have been subjected, and if it is that there are trumped up charges against Mrs. Quincy Gums Marie, then they will eventually be found out, because the prosecution has the burden of presenting their case. They have the burden of proof to show that a crime was committed. And that is why it is my view that the criminal proceedings ought to have run its course, or if you decided that you're not going to run the course of the criminal proceedings, that there be action taken in relation to the minister to show Anguilla, our children, our youth, the future of our country, the world, that we do not take these matters lightly and there has to be consequences for our actions.
Now, as much as you want to get back into government and to serve all the people of Anguilla, and you just mentioned the district that you represent, and you would have done some positive things in your district. And as we wind down, can you share some of those positive things that you've done, and what are your plans for your people in your district if re-elected?
Yes, thank you for that, Mervin. In 2011, even though I lost general election in 2010, I would have started Anguilla Eastern's first community center. And that is the Hope Center. It still operates today. It provides community services, after school homework program. There's a computer lab, so our children and adults can learn. We have courses are offered at the Hope Center, such as EDPM, electronic document preparation. We offer reading classes to our young people. And this has been, as I said, ongoing since 2011. Every year as well, I contribute to the Morris Vanderpool Primary School with cases of books and school supplies, etc. And that contribution comes after I personally deliver items to those persons, those children and families who I know are in need of school books, school supplies, in some cases school uniforms, and it's done very quietly. So I will go, I know who the homes are. Sometimes I'm contacted by them, other times I visit and I say, do you need X, Y, Z? Do your children need X, Y, Z? And I provide that. And what is left over, I provide to the schools, so that if you have a child who I may not have identified at the time, that is at the school and is unable and the parents are unable to provide for them, then there's school supplies at the school that the school can give to the children. Every Christmas prior to COVID, we would have had a Christmas party for the children of the constituency, and that is something we're looking at putting in place as well. But one of the issues, of course, is after COVID and the GST, etc., you find that a lot of persons are not have the ability to be able to contribute the way that they did before. But it's something that we intend to do this year again, have our Christmas party for the children in our constituency. We also would undertake a village function called the Village Thing, where we would allow persons who have items to sell, whether it's food, clothing, etc., to set up in a village, a community setting where the tents are next to each other. You have dominoes, you have the cycling race, you have any number of activities, music, etc., that goes on into the night. And that again is for the people of our community to be able to sell and make some money for themselves. And that cost is we raise funds to be able to bear that cost. And so, and generally going through the constituency, my District 2 constituency is quite small. And so because it's small, it's very intimate.
Gotcha.
So while I've done these things on a larger scale, the impact that I provide is more on a one-to-one level.
Yes.
Going through the homes and persons who live in my village. And so, but I want to say, Mervin, because it would be remiss of me not to talk about the shortcomings of this administration and why the people of Anguilla should vote for the Anguilla United Front for the next election. We know that this government is campaigning already. They're seeking to constantly misrepresent the truth and to paint a picture of glory when in fact, if you visit Anguilla, if you listen to the people of Anguilla, people are hurting. The goods and services tax, the way in which it was implemented, is creating a lot of damage to businesses, to individuals. People are barely able to survive and to make ends meet. I know you made mention earlier of Hodge and Minister Ken Hodge and the minimum wage. The reality is that the majority of the hotels are already offering a minimum wage of $6 an hour, and that is the proposed minimum wage structure. So there are certain sectors yet pay less than that, but by and large, the average person is already being paid more than $6 an hour. And so that's why you would hear that the people of Anguilla are not necessarily satisfied, because it's not a minimum wage that's impacting us. With the onset of GST, we have to be looking at a living wage. Because the reality is in Anguilla, the majority of persons, many working persons, hold two jobs. And if each job is holding $6 and some cents an hour, then they're working two jobs to make $12 an hour. And so that is the real consideration. With the increase in cost of living, with the increase in food prices, with the manner in which now people have to be able to live and barely make ends meet, we have to look at how we can best help our people. And one of those things that the Anguilla United Front is committed to doing is revisiting the goods and services tax and the way in which it was implemented and the extent and breadth of its reach. And so there are certain things that could be done to be able to dampen the effect. And in fact, a number of those suggestions have already been made to the government of Anguilla, but of course have been dismissed because they're coming from the mouths of the opposition. And these are things that we're going to take a very real look at. These suggestions and other suggestions to be able to ensure that our people reach to a position where they can have a decent standard of living, where they can once again start to put monies in their pockets and be able to take care of the children, be able to send them off to university and pay for them, etc. So the issue that this administration has is, one, they've been deemed to be untrustworthy. Their leadership is lacking. They use the House of Assembly to attack private citizens. They have a dictatorial approach in the way in which they are dealing with matters in this country and with the people of Anguilla. And I have said on previous programs as well that in my view, this is a very immature government. If you speak out against them, they have you to kill. They put you as public enemy number one, and they go after you with everything that they've got to ensure that they destroy you. This is not the type of government that we need to lead Anguilla. We need to be able to have a government who's working for the people, as opposed to trying to bend the people into submission. And that is the current government that we have. Their style, attitude, and approach. And this is a term that was used by the former Minister of Albino, Honorable Neil Rogers. He penned the description of the AUM government, and it's the same description that today applies to the APM government. Their style, their attitude, and their approach. Now, what is important is that we know that this government entered office with no plan. There was no manifesto. There was nothing that they had that they would have their own thoughts and views that they would put in place. And that is why I say that this is a caretaker government, because every single thing that was left there before, they have continued. Now, a United Front government, an AUF government would have continued the same plans. An AUF government would have implemented the goods and services tax in a different form, which would have had a different impact on the people of Anguilla. And certainly at a time when COVID was still affecting us, we would have negotiated with the British to delay the implementation of the GST, even in its phased form, so that we could do right by our people in our country. And so what is needed is vision. What is needed is a focus and maturity in leading the country. And this government lacks these things. And so under my leadership, as the leader of the Anguilla United Front, we will be able to take Anguilla further into the future. We will be able to restore economic prosperity. We will be able to ensure that our children have the education and the quality and the ability to go out into the wider world and compete with other persons who have had greater opportunities because they may have had greater access to resources that we may be lacking in Anguilla. And so there's a clear vision as to where we want to go, as to what we want to see for Anguilla. It is not about our personal self-aggrandizement. As you mentioned earlier, I have always remained humble. The people in my constituency can tell you that the Cora that they met in 2009 is the same Cora that they meet in 2023. I am no greater or no better than when I first got elected, in my mind, because my job is not about benefiting myself, it is about benefiting the people of Anguilla. That is the reason why I entered the political arena. That is the reason why I've been chosen as the leader of the Anguilla United Front. And that is the reason why, God spare life, come 2025, I will be elected as Premier of Anguilla.
And what an historic moment that will be. The Honorable Cora Hodge, thank you so much for joining me here tonight on THG Network.
Thank you, Mervin. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I look forward to future discussions. So thank you and have a good night.
Thank you.
Carl & Sons have been serving the people of St. Martin for over 40 years. And the food and service get better and better. From early morning, customers flock to the bakery for their favorite sandwiches, cakes, pastries, you name it. First thing at mornings and last thing at afternoons, folks rush to Carl & Sons for simply the best. There are two locations, Colbay and on the Punfill. In Colbay, the opening hours are Monday to Friday from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. On Saturdays, 6 a.m. to 5 p.m. And on Sundays, 6:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. and 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Opening hours on the Punfill, Monday to Friday, 6:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. Saturday and Sunday, 6:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. We also cater for weddings, parties, special events, whatever the occasion. It's Carl & Sons. Our staff, we are always happy to serve you. Call us today, the Colbay location, 721-544-2462. That's 721-544-2462. Or in Phillipsburg, 721-543-1059. That's 721-543-1059. It's Carl & Sons Bakery. We are here to serve you.